videos all about the history of transportation presented by the Yuma Crossing National Heritage Area. My name is Emily, and I'm going to be your guide as we motor back in time. In this video, we're going to travel back to the turn of the century to learn about the origins of the automobile, or car, how they have transformed the way that we travel today, and why they continue to mark Yuma as a crossroads for travelers. Like with most great inventions, the automobile didn't happen in isolation. It's actually really hard to pinpoint just one single person that helped invent the modern automobile. So we're going to talk about the first recorded vehicle and then how that kind of evolved into the modern automobile and also into the modern gas engine that we use today. Because in the beginning, it really wasn't clear what type of engine would be the most effective in an automobile. They actually tried steam power, they tried electric power, they tried some other forms of engines, and they also tried the internal gas combustion engine that we use today. And so we're going to talk about that first automobile, how it evolves and changes, and how gas power ultimately wins out in the modern automobile that we all drive today. Most of us drive gas vehicles. We're all familiar with the gas station, a staple of American cross-country travel. And so why is that? That's a question we're going to be asking ourselves. So let's dig in and start at the very beginning with the first recorded vehicle, which was invented by a French military engineer named Nicolas Joseph Cugnot. And he invented a steam-powered vehicle with the goal of pulling cannons across battlefields or to battlefields. And so that was kind of his goal with his vehicle. He also, this is a photograph of that first vehicle. He also has the honor of being in the first vehicle crash on record because he neglected to put brakes on his vehicle. And so this is actually a picture of him crashing into a wall. But while his vehicle, it was able to do what he intended it to do, it was not much of a commercial success, and it was only marginally used by the military. And so it's not a super, not everybody's not riding in Cugnot's vehicle, but it does inspire a lot of other inventors and innovators and people who think like, hey, this vehicle idea could be really smart. It could overshadow the sometimes unreliable animal travel. And so people start to jump on board and mess around with his idea, try different types of engines until we get to the modern vehicle. And so Cugnot was working, his invention was completed in 1769. It takes about another 100 years for the modern combustion engine to be invented. And this is invented by another Nicholas, but this time a German named Nicholas Otto. In 1876, he invents the first modern internal combustion engine. So now we've got our engine, but we need something to put it on. We need a type of carriage that will work with our engine. And so that's where the man who is often credited with inventing the first automobile comes in, Carl Benz. And so he's another German. That name Benz might sound a little familiar to you. If you're into fancy cars, you might know Mercedes-Benz, which is still a car company today. He is the founder of that company along with a friend that he later partnered with. And so he actually designs the carriage that the motor goes in. And he patents both using the engine and the carriage to create the modern automobile. And so he's often solely credited with creating the modern car, but he didn't do it alone or in isolation, which is important to remember. And he also didn't make the vehicle popular on his own. His wife was actually, she played a big role in marketing his automobile. There's a pretty famous story of her taking the first ever recorded joyride as a publicity stunt to show people her husband's prototype vehicle. So in 1888, she takes out his prototype, travels 67 miles to her mother's house without his permission, because in the 1800s, apparently wives needed permission to travel. So she takes his vehicle and she travels 67 miles to visit her mother with her two small children. And as you can imagine, in the 1800s, this was quite a sight to see a woman out alone in this strange contraption, getting really dirty. She had to fill up the gas tank, and she had some trouble with the engine at one point, and so she had to get down and dirty to clean it up. And so it was quite the sight and story, and it really was a good publicity stunt to at least tell people about his vehicle, if not get them on board with buying one. And so again, like every great thing, it didn't happen with just one person or in isolation. So how does that Benz vehicle, which I didn't point it out, this is the Benz automobile. So this is our first vehicle. This is the Benz automobile. How does that turn into the commercial success that we see of cars? So Benz automobile and other ones that came about around the same time were very expensive and only really owned by the wealthy. And people thought they were really cool, but it wasn't super practical for most people to own a vehicle. But that changed in 1908 when Henry Ford, which is another name that probably sounds familiar, Ford is also still a car company, when Ford came out with his Model T. And the reason the Model T was so successful is because it was affordable. It was something that the average person could afford. It was easy enough for the average person to maintain. And the reason Ford was able to sell the Model T at such an affordable price is not because he was a car genius, but because he was a manufacturing genius. And so manufacturing is the process of building something in a factory. And Ford is the father of a technique called the assembly line, which you may or may not be familiar with this story or heard it before. But the assembly line is this idea that, so you start at one end, a person puts two pieces together, passes it along, puts some more pieces together, passes it along, and continues down the line until you have your Model T. And so this ended up being a really speedy way, a really efficient way, a really cheap way to build really anything, but of course a car. And because it could be made so quickly, so mass produced, and so cheaply, Ford could sell it at a really affordable cost for people. So the Model T over its lifetime could range from $260 to $850 for a brand new one. And of course, you could get bells and whistles on your car at that time too. So the more expensive ones had more bells and whistles than the very cheap end, but that this was an affordable price for the average American at the time. And I just think it's wild to think about buying a brand new car for $200. Like, that is not something you could do today. And so this really explodes the amount of people that own cars and can see it as a viable and an effective way of transportation. And cars also expand the amount of space that people can travel. So cars can travel further than a wagon in a shorter amount of time. And so this increases people's bubbles, as I like to say. It increases their world. They can go more places, they can see more things, they can live further away from each other and still have contact. So that's really cool. And just to further solidify how revolutionary the Model T was, I've got a few numbers. So the Model T came out in 1908. They stopped manufacturing it in 1927. So first of all, it has a 20-year run, which is pretty impressive. And over those 20 years, 15 million Model Ts are manufactured, that is a lot of cars. And during its heyday, which is from the 1910s to the 1920s, the Model T accounted for half of all cars driven in America. So if you're in a town, half of the cars you see are going to be Model Ts, that's just wild. So many Model Ts. And the Model T, going back to the type of engine, Model Ts used an internal gas combustion engine. And so that is why gas-powered engines ultimately went out, not solely because of the Model T, but gas power at this point started to be more effective. It was also cheaper to get gas than some of the other types of fuel. And so that's why the gas engine really becomes the only engine that people use. And that's why most of us today drive gas-powered cars, and most of us have to stop at gas stations when we take road trips or every once in a while. And so that's why gas power wins out. So we have cars everywhere. Cars are exploding and people are getting really excited. But there is another major roadblock, so to speak, to keeping cars from becoming the most common form of transportation, or what everybody in the United States is using. And that big dilemma is roads. So cars, unlike wagons, they can't go over super rough terrain. Like wagons, you can kind of push them through, depending if you've got a really good animal, you can get through, or if you're just on a horse, you don't have to worry as much about what type of road you're traveling on. And so when cars become popular, yes, there are roads, but they're not great. And it's kind of hard to know where you're going. They're not universal, so to speak. And so it's hard to get to some places. Some places only have a dirt road, or you might have to make your own road on your way there. And so it's hard to get places sometimes by automobile. And another thing that people will start to do is drive on railroad tracks. So by the 1900s, when cars become popular, railroads are really well established. There's tracks all over the place, and they're also really well mapped. You can get a railroad map pretty easy. And so people drive on the railroad tracks because it's a road, so it's a constant terrain, and it's also mapped really well. So it's easy to know where you're going. But there's one major problem with traveling on a railroad track, and you may be able to guess it. It's that what happens if a train is coming at you? And so there end up being lots of accidents because people are driving their cars on railroad tracks. And so that starts to become an issue. So just to put it into perspective of how hard it was to travel long distances by car without roads, this is a picture of the first man to make a cross-country journey by car. So he traveled from New York to California by car in 1903. It took him 63 days to travel across the country, and roughly $8,000 in 1903, $8,000, that is a lot of money and a really long journey. And to compare that to today it takes about 4 to 7 days to travel across country, depending on how many stops you want to make. And if you're being really budget friendly, you can probably do it in under $1,000 if you're not like stopping and sightseeing and all that kind of stuff. So today it's arguably pretty easy to travel from coast to coast. It was not so easy when this guy, his name was Nelson Jackson, when he was trying to travel across the country. So we have this road dilemma. How does this all relate to Yuma? Where does Yuma come in? How do we combat this road dilemma? All of these are great questions and things I'm going to answer. So cars do show up in Yuma just like everywhere else in the country. We're not we were not immune to the excitement of cars. And we were also not immune to the road dilemma. So in the 1910s, Yuma and the surrounding area start two major road projects that really help car travel and solidify Yuma as a crossroads or a stop on major road routes. And so two major projects, they happen at about the same time. So we're gonna focus on them one at a time. The first one is the Plank Road, which you may be familiar with, you may not. This is actually, the Plank Road was on the California side of the river. So it wasn't in Yuma, but it was an important part of travel to and from Yuma. So if you've watched our other videos or know a little bit about Yuma history, we've always been a big crossroads, a big place where people would travel through into California. So during the gold rush, Yuma became a popular hub because it was easier to cross the Colorado River here in Yuma. The river naturally narrowed, and so it was easier to cross. So Yuma really becomes known as a traveling town, or a place that you travel through to get into California. And it maintains this status or reputation. And so when cars become popular, people from California still want to travel through Yuma to get where they're going. Or people from Yuma, of course, want to travel into California and go on vacations or see the beach or conduct business. And so as cars become more popular, a formal road between San Diego and Yuma becomes really necessary. But if you've ever traveled from here to San Diego today, you know that there's one major landmark between here and San Diego, and that is the Imperial Sand Dunes. And today they don't pose too much of a threat to car travel, but back then they were very ominous, and without a road, it was nearly impossible to travel by car through the dunes, because if you stopped at all, your car would sink into the sand. And so it was, unless you were a really good driver, it was super hard to travel through those sand dunes by car. And so people start to, as more people own cars, they get together and they're like, we really need a road through the dunes, because going around them takes a really long time. It adds like an extra X amount of hours. It's not very fun. Wouldn't it be easier to just go straight through them? And so people in the Yuma community, the Imperial Valley in California, and in San Diego all start to come together to raise funds for a plank road through the dunes. They don't think they can make a paved road, but they think a plank road would be pretty effective. And two big names in that are Ed Fletcher and Ed Boyd. Fletcher especially starts a big campaign to raise money. He actually drives through the dunes to show how difficult it is to do without a road, and that gets a lot of publicity. He talks to newspapers in the area and raises enough money for 13,000 planks and labor costs to build the first plank road through the sand dunes. And so on February 15th, 1915, they start building the first plank road through the dunes. And on April 4th, 1915, it's completed. And then after it's completed, the California Highway Commission takes over maintenance of the road. So by 1915, the plank road is pretty solidified. It does get changed once a year later. So originally it was like two lines of planks, and then they turned it into what's in both of these images here, just one lane. So the plank road has kind of a mixed history. So yes, it does improve travel from Yuma to California, but it's still not an ideal way to travel, as you can imagine. And there's lots of reasons for this. So number one, it's only one lane. As you can see in this top image here, there's only one lane for a car to go through. And so if you were on the road going this way and another car starts coming the other direction, one of you has to pull off into the sand in order to let the other one pass. So that was a little bit of an inconvenience. Because the road was a plank road, the speed limit was also only 10 miles per hour. So it was, as you can imagine, very slow going through the dunes. Another big issue that ended up being a really hefty expense was sandstorms. So the dunes are always shifting, there's sandstorms, and the road would get covered. And sometimes people would get trapped on the road during a sandstorm. And so this becomes a major issue, having to constantly either clear off the roads or even pick them up and move them to move with the shifting dunes. And so that is a major issue that the plank road faces. And on top of all of that, it's really hot, especially in the summer. I'm sure you guys know it's very hot here in Yuma and out in the sand dunes. And cars back then, they needed water to keep cool. Today we use coolant, but you could still use water if that's all you had. So the sand dunes, like, you need a lot of water to keep your engine cool. And of course, there's not a lot of places to get water. So the plank road was great. It was a good starting point, but it was still not easy. Like, an unexperienced driver usually didn't take the plank road. You had to go in prepared with water. You had to know what you were getting into. And so while it's a really fun story, it's really cool, it was a great starting point, but it didn't last for very long. So in 1926, the US starts some initial highways, not the interstates we know today, which I'm going to talk about at the very end, but they do start funding some highway systems, and Highway 80 is the one that ends up going through Yuma. And when that one's built, those engineers come together and, like, we can do a paved road through the dunes. And so that's when the dunes get a paved road, and the plank road is out of the picture, which people were a little bit nostalgic, but they're also like, paved road is probably a good idea. So in 1926, you see the end of our famous plank road, infamous plank road. So we've got our plank road, but having a road through the dunes is not going to be super helpful if you don't have a bridge across the river to get to the dunes. And so building an auto bridge across the Colorado River was a really big project for the Yuma people specifically. The people of Yuma played a major role in bringing a bridge to Yuma. And of course, it's one that we are probably all familiar with today, the Ocean to Ocean Highway Bridge, which is still an iconic landmark of Yuma. People go down there and take selfies all the time. So the Ocean to Ocean Bridge was the first auto bridge built over the lower Colorado River, and it really was a community effort to get the bridge done. So in 1913, the people of Yuma start a letter writing campaign to Congress. So they want to get federal money to build this bridge, because they want it to be part of what was called the Ocean to Ocean Highway, which is where the name for the bridge comes from. It was part of a highway network that went from coast to coast. So if you've ever wondered why it's called Ocean to Ocean Bridge, that's why. And so they wanted federal money to get the funds to build this bridge. They wrote to the congressional representatives, and one of them does take up the cause, a man named Carl Hayden, who was a Yuma citizen. He takes up the cause, and he pushes a bill through Congress in 1913 that allocated money to build the Ocean to Ocean Bridge. So they've got their funding. It takes a few years to figure out how they're going to build the bridge and what they want it to look like. But by 1915, they start building the bridge, and on May 22nd, 1915, the Ocean to Ocean Bridge opens to the public. And as you can imagine, the people of Yuma are very excited. They party. The first person to drive across the bridge was E.F. Sanguinetti, who is a famous businessman from the area at the time. He was a big supporter of the bridge, so he's the first one to drive across. And then, of course, they have a parade across the bridge, and they have a big picnic. They have bands. They do horse races, which you think it would be car races, but they have horse races because that's still a normal form of transportation. Even though there's cars, at this time you see a lot of carriages and cars. And so that's where our ocean to ocean bridge comes from. And it continues to be an important bridge across the Colorado River. It also becomes a part of US Highway 80. So it directly connects to the paved road that takes over after the plank road is built or removed. So the paved road after the plank road, it's connected to that. And while the bridge does go out of commission for a few years, the people of Yuma again come together in the early 2000s to restore the bridge and bring it back to the city. So it is a big deal. It may not feel like it, but it was really revolutionary at the time that it was built. And it again, today is an important landmark of our city. And so Ocean to Ocean Bridge and the Plank Road are what solidify Yuma as a travel town, a town that you travel through as part of the US highway systems. So car travel in Yuma today, of course, we still have cars. I'm sure you all have ridden in a car today. As we speak this morning, you were probably in a car or a bus. So they are still a super important form of travel, especially here in the United States. Cars are almost a necessity, something people have to get to work, to get to school, to travel, to move. Cars are everywhere. And so Yuma continues to be an important stop for people traveling by car. Both the Plank Road, US Highway 80 that took over afterwards, the Ocean to Ocean Bridge, they have all been overshadowed by Interstate 8, which is part of the interstate system that was developed in the 1950s by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He created the modern, or supported the modern road system that we know today, the modern interstates that we have that make traveling so much easier and so much faster. And Yuma continues to be a part of those interstates. We weren't overshadowed like a lot of other cities, if you've ever watched the movie Cars, the town that Lightning McQueen goes to, it was overshadowed by the interstate. It starts to become run down. That's part of the storyline. Yuma did not have that issue. We continued to be a part of the interstate system. And so lots of people, especially those traveling from San Diego to Phoenix, stop here in Yuma, and we continue to be on the maps, continue to be an important city, continue to be an important crossroads for people who are traveling or who choose to stay in our. Did you like what you learned today? If so, check out our next and final video all about the history of airplanes and how they transformed Yuma into the military town we know today. Hope to see you all there. Bye!